My name is Karen Favazza Spencer. Since fiscal responsibility and legality are critical to city councils, I'm going to offer a primarily economic perspective today. Fluoridation is considered a state or municipal decision, but those decisions are not supposed to be any less protective than federal regulations. Moreover, all waters are considered a national resource, albeit managed locally. Fluoridation programs fail to fulfill the letter and intent of many national acts like the Clean Water Act that regulates pollutants, Safe Drinking Water Act that is supposed to protect susceptible populations, the Fitchburg Act regarding manufactured poisons, RCRA, Hazardous Waste, and TSCA, the Toxic Substances Control Act that protects against the unreasonable risk posed by any chemical use. Fluoride should be regulated under all of those federal statutes. The city's annual water quality report lists fluoride as a water contaminant along with PFAS, barium, and radium. Fluoride, which EPA scientists characterize as a gold standard neurotoxin, is the only substance added to water to treat man. Moreover, when we add fluoride, it's not just fluoride. Fluoride is a byproduct of phosphate mining and manufacturing. Each batch of the hydrofluorosilicic acid Fitchburg buys has a different percentage of arsenic, lead, and hydrogen fluoride listed on the certificate of analysis. All of those contaminants have a zero contaminant goal for water because they are known health hazards. Yet, the concentration for the highly carcinogenic arsenic can be as high as 50 parts per million in fluoridation chemicals. Fitchburg adds 3,500 gallons of HFSA to its water annually. I estimate the cumulative amount added since 1975 is close to 250,000 tons. This timeline bears close scrutiny. The non-enforceable goals described in the 1974 SDWA are based solely on possible health risk and exposure over a lifetime, with an adequate margin of safety for susceptible subpopulations. In 2006, the National Research Council of the National Academies of Science advised the EPA that their fluoride contaminant goal, which is the same as their actionable threshold, was not protective of human health. Moreover, the NRC advised the EPA that there was no evidence of safety for susceptible subpopulations at any concentration. Those populations include pregnant women and their fetuses, bottle-fed infants and young children, the elderly, and those in fragile health. EPA has failed to act, saying fluoride is a low priority item. In 2017, a de novo lawsuit was filed against the EPA in federal court based on evidence of prenatal and postnatal harm to developing brains and the TSCA regulations regarding unreasonable risk. That lawsuit has been delayed repeatedly, but has a January 2024 trial date. Still, fluoridationists loudly protest that fluoridation prevents cavities and saves consumers money. A 2015 critique of that cost-benefit claim found it to be totally without merit. I quote, "Minimal correction reduced the savings to $3 per person per year for a best-case scenario, but this savings is eliminated by the estimated cost of treating dental fluorosis." A Cochrane collaborative analysis is considered the international gold standard of science. When Cochrane looked at the efficacy of fluoridation in 2015, they found no socioeconomic benefit to poor children and no benefit to adults. But they did determine that at our current optimal concentration of 0.7 parts per million, dental fluorosis would likely result in 40% of consumers having fluoride-damaged teeth, with 12% considering the effect objectionable. According to hard U.S. data, Cochrane wasn't too far off, but they didn't account for other sources of fluoride. We've seen this impact in multiple national surveys. More than half of American teens have dental fluorosis on at least 2 teeth, and about 20% have moderate to severe dental fluorosis. Fluorosis literally means poisoned by fluoride, and moderate to severe means 50% or more of the affected teeth are not only badly stained, but likely brittle. This will result in costly cosmetic dentistry during young adulthood. A Fitchburg mother testified on March 21st that because she had to bottle feed her youngest child, her child's teeth came in stained. You'd be surprised who it affects. Groton dentist Dr. Bob Evans is the father of Chris Evans, the actor who plays Captain America. Dr. Evans testified at the Boston State House that he was horrified when, after following the American Dental Association's fluoride recommendations, his son's permanent teeth came in with severe dental fluorosis. Next time you see Captain America at the movies, know this. He has veneers worth thousands of dollars hiding the damage caused by fluoride. Dr. Evans' testimony is attached to this presentation, as are other items used as graphics on these slides. Dr. Evans dropped his ADA membership and joined the International Academy of Oral Medicine and Toxicology. The ADA is a consumer group that benefits dentists, while the IAOMT, like other organizations opposed to fluoridation, has a science and patient focus. I urge you to investigate the IAOMT documents. Many notable civil and human rights activists oppose fluoridation. The Texas chapter of the League of United Latin American Citizens is the largest in the country. They've opposed fluoridation since 2011 because of its disproportionate harm to Hispanic and Black populations. It's a genetics thing. Ambassador Andrew Young, whose father and grandfather were dentists, is one of several Black leaders openly opposed to fluoridation. Using the formula provided by Dr. Hardy Lieback, the retired head of preventive dentistry at the University of Toronto, I calculate that about 15,000 consumers of Fitchburg water will pay approximately $25 million for cosmetic dentistry over the next 40 years in order to repair the dental damage done to them during their childhood by fluoridation policy. But this isn't about teeth. Dental fluorosis is associated with increased learning disabilities, and both dental and mental damage are found on a dose-response trend line, which begins below the optimal concentration. And since dose is dependent on consumption, the dose of fluoride very much exceeds safety thresholds for those who, for whatever reason, consume more water. That group includes diabetics and those with kidney disease. Families generally assume dental and medical costs and bottled or filtered water costs, but the city assumes the cost for the increased rates of ADHD and other disabilities such as low IQ. As you know, SPED costs are significant. Moreover, these children are more likely to present an economic drain on society as adults. I trust you've read the recent reports on the suppression of the National Toxicology Program's multi-year systematic review and meta-analysis on fluoride. FOIA documents and whistleblower testimony reveal that the Oral Health Division of the CDC lobbied Admiral Rachel Levine at the Health and Human Services to deep six the NTP analysis, which validated pre- and postnatal exposure to fluoride consistent with fluoridation policy results in lower IQ. HHS has a budget in excess of $100 million to promote fluoridation. That money funds the Oral Health Division of the CDC, as well as provides funding to the state departments of public health. The local Board of Health is the operating arm of the State Department of Public Health. The lawsuit against the EPA based on developmental neurotoxicity under TSCR has been on hold since 2020 pending the publication of the NTP report. But back to economics. There are 500 births per year in Fitchburg. If those pregnant women purchased bottled water for their families during their pregnancies, it would cost those families $200,000. If they continued using bottled water up until their child's third birthday in an attempt to protect teeth and brains, that would be a $1 million annual cost, $4 million till the age 12 per cohort, which citywide is $48 million per year for your constituents with young families. Fluoride suppresses thyroid hormones, increasing the incidence of low thyroid in fluoridated communities by 30 to 50%. It is also nephrotoxic. It damages kidneys, especially in those who already have impaired kidney function. So those with thyroid and kidney disease are often advised to avoid fluoridated water. But again, those are constituent costs. In addition to additional sped costs, the city has liability risks. The 2019 Sandy, Utah fluoride overfeed only affected 600 homes, but the financial impact was huge. The city paid the EPA fines, but is still dealing with lawsuits, and consumers are still dealing with the health impact. In 2005, there was a fluoride accident at the Westminster water treatment plant that required state and private hazmat crews for cleanup and resulted in 3 workers being transported to the hospital. On February 24th, Sun Prairie Utilities in Wisconsin discovered a failed fluoride pump valve resulted in a fluoride concentration of over 13 parts per million in their system. The maximum EPA contamination level is 4. Luckily, they were able to isolate and flush the poison water before it reached consumers. Fluoridation is an unnecessary liability risk for the city. I don't have time to go through this list of different community experiences, but you have the hyperlinked slide. However, I will mention that none of the communities in Berkshire, Barnstable, or Nantucket counties fluoridate, and that in 2019, Edgartown ratified a town ordinance that effectively bans fluoridation. Then there are the environmental concerns. Fluoride is scientifically characterized as a poison, and the chemical Fitchburg adds to city water is not only contaminated with arsenic, lead, and hydrogen fluoride, but other harmful substances that we don't test for. And about 99% of all of it goes directly to wastewater. It doesn't magically disappear. Suffice to say, fluoride affects soil chemistry and upsets ecosystems through its toxic effects on plants, insects, amphibians, fish, birds, etc. Then there's the pollution from plastic water bottles. If Fitchburg wants to reduce pollution and fight climate change, ending fluoridation would be a step in that direction. The Dover, New Hampshire Utilities Superintendent said fluoridation chemicals are worse than battery acid. They are, which is why there is so much maintenance required on fluoridation equipment. Additionally, chlorine and fluoride have a sinister synergy. Many water workers are opposed to fluoridation. Most communities prefer not to look, but the cost of the fluoride chemical is about half of the annual operational cost. But I know many of us want to cling to the magic potion narrative. I did. Grand Rapids, Michigan has been fluoridated since 1945, and in April 2019, a pediatric dentist reported that the youngest patients in his practice have between 3 and 20 cavities on their first visit. Last week, a press release from the New York City Health and Hospitals group stated that childhood dental cavities were epidemic and advised that regular visits to the dentist were the best way to reduce cavities. New York City has been fluoridated since 1965. Fluoridation doesn't matter. Not when it comes to cavities. Most of the world does not fluoridate, and dental decay decreased in those countries in the 20th century at the same rate because of quality of life improvement. Dentist John Calhoun was the first prominent fluoridationist who publicly changed his mind after he looked at the data. He lost his job over it, but he published 2 famous articles in medical journals, one with this graph demonstrating that fluoridation, the shaded area, and fluoridated dental products, the purple line, were coincidental, not causal, in the reduction of cavities, the black line. Although there are about a dozen late 20th century studies showing no increase in cavities after cessation, there are 2 21st century studies claiming ending fluoridation increased cavities. Both are flawed. One uses a date 7 years before cessation for comparison, and most of the increase in decay in that community occurred while it was fluoridated. The other used Medicaid codes as proxies for cavities, but there were significant changes in Medicaid during that period. Nevertheless, cavity rates seem to be increasing in recent years in both fluoridated and non-fluoridated communities. Crumbling infrastructure, poor nutrition, and lack of access to affordable dental care are to blame. Still, zealous fluoridationists keep trying. The latest studies show there is a fraction of a single cavity less in children living in fluoridated communities. But I doubt it's even that, given the known bias of those authors who opine that the increased lead in the blood of children who drink fluoridated tap water is less of a concern than the clinically inconsequential size of a single cavity. Fluoridation doesn't reduce decay, not in Grand Rapids, New York City, or Fitchburg, but it can make teeth unattractive and brittle, and increases sped costs because it's a developmental neurotoxicant. Thousands of your constituents pay millions for bottled water because they have medical reason not to consume fluoride. There are hidden operational costs as well as an accelerated destruction of infrastructure. The city assumes various liabilities. Fluoridation pollutes the environment, contaminates the water table, and contributes to plastic pollution. Fluoridation policy may have started with good intentions, but it is a misguided and immoral medical mandate that is bad for people, planet, and pocketbooks. Councilors, relevant to next steps, our team has provided you with paper copies of draft language for your deliberation. But before that, Dr. Mullenix, Mr. Muller, and I are happy to answer your questions as well as revisit any slide. When I began this presentation, after a couple of dozen dentists plus the chair of the Board of Health passionately testified that fluoridation was safe and effective, one dentist even called it vitamin F. The city councilors had resigned and smug looks on their faces. When I finished my presentation, they looked alarmed. It was apparent that although this presentation with hyperlinks, footnotes, and an appendix, which was made available to the councilors ahead of time, not more than a couple of them even glanced at it, because they agreed with their local dentist. You'd think they'd have questions about the presentation for the experts I had provided. But instead, they engaged in a lot of posturing, and all but one of the 9 councilors who spoke did not make any mistakes. However, the most interesting thing after the presentation was that one of the 2 dentists who zoomed in and introduced themselves as leaders of the organizations who endorsed fluoridation managed to make the council forget all about the actual experts regarding the facts presented. One of those volunteers repeatedly unmuted himself to jump in with, "I'd like to answer that." A councilor began with a question, to which the compliant councilors acquiesced. It was as if a used car salesman followed you to the garage and kept elbowing the mechanic out of the way to say, "This is a good car, you should buy it." Their answers often failed to answer the question asked, But more than that, they went beyond the marketing pitch and logical fallacies that are their bedrock. Rather than address any of the material in my presentation, the two fluoridation apologists insisted that all science claiming to find harm has been repudiated, and implied any organization or credentialed person who said otherwise was a quack. I happen to know their interpretation of repudiation is these same two dentists and their cronies write letters to credible journals who publish the peer-reviewed neuroscience, immunological studies, thyroid science, or kidney science that is not favorable to their favorite mythology, or post blog entries that sound good for their narrative. In other words, they are professional propagandists. Sadly, this tactic worked. The councilors reverted back to their confirmation bias. They seemed to think that by ignoring the material sent to them and reading policy statements from the EPA and CDC or marketing literature from the ADA was research, and accepted whole cloth untruths such as, "Without fluoride in bones and teeth, you'd be in trouble." When in fact, if the councilors had clicked on the hyperlinks provided them in my presentation and the appendix, they would have seen that 10 studies published in the past few years have found that fluoride is harmful to bones. It increases the incidence of fractures in postmenopausal women and worsens or can cause the symptoms of rheumatoid arthritis and osteoarthritis. A 2022 study suggests that the specific chemical Fitchburg uses is genotoxic to bones, which is biologically consistent with fluoride's function as an enzyme poison, and other studies on fluoride and other earlier studies on bones. But why let the scientific facts get in the way of groupthink and confirmation bias? One of the councilors prematurely moved to end the meeting, and the petition was withdrawn without any discussion of the material presented, with a vote of 7-3. Now, I know that it takes time for people to change their minds, and I knew as well as provided the council in advance with material on the major National Toxicology Program event for May 4th, relevant to fluoride in water, to which they should pay attention. If the councilors didn't vote to petition for a home rule exemption to mass fluoridation law that night, which would make it possible for them to assume legal control over fluoridation schemes in their city, which would include ending the practice, I believe that the NTP meeting and other events would result in future consideration in early 2024, if not before. However, at the regular City Council meeting on May 22nd, a new motion was made to change the withdrawal to a denial so that the City Council may not legally consider fluoridation for at least another 2 years. That motion passed 6-5. 2 days later, the May 4th NTP report validated that the repudiation of the so-called dental experts in government and private industry was not adequate to prevent the publication of the rigorous National Toxicology Program systematic review that found prenatal and postnatal exposure, even in optimally fluoridated communities, well below the secondary safety concentration set by the EPA, let alone the higher actionable concentration, are in fact harmful to developing brains. But that doesn't matter to Fitchburg. The councilors who didn't do their homework before the meeting, or even study the material at the meeting, decided they wouldn't even countenance being asked to do their homework for another 2 years. The Fitchburg City Council cannot stop the publication of more damning science or the resolution of the Tosca lawsuit against the EPA. Neither will it stop the filing of other lawsuits here and in other states. The hubris of the 6 out of 11 Fitchburg City Councilors who refused to listen to experts like Dr. Phyllis Mullenix slammed the door on considering the economic and legal liabilities associated with fluoridation policy, as well as the scientific evidence of real harm to constituents in the environment. This may very well blow up in this Massachusetts city. just like the hubris of the NASA managers who insisted on launching the Space Shuttle Challenger in 1986 over the objections of engineering experts to whom they refused to listen, resulted in that spectacular disaster. And for the same reason, a decision made from a position of willful blindness, arrogance, and groupthink